Henry Tudor, a relatively obscure man of Welsh birth, defeated the usurper king Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485 to become Henry VII, thereby beginning one of the most extraordinary dynasties in all history. This is the story of the reign of the first Tudor monarch. Henry was crowned at Westminster in October 1485, 2 short months after his triumph at Bosworth. Early in his reign, Henry, being a usurper himself, predictably faced challenges to his royal authority. One of the most notable came in the shape of a young man named Lambert Simnel. Lambert claimed that he was the rightful heir to the English crown. Although, being little more than a boy, it was really men around him who were masterminding his bid for power. The Earl of Lincoln had had young Lambert crowned in Dublin before they mustered as many men as they could as they sought to launch an invasion fleet of England, where they would hope to overthrow the incumbent king. Lambert's army was as far removed from a professional fighting force as you could wish to imagine. They did have some German mercenaries who were more expert in the art of warfare than most of the other men, but the bulk of the army were opportunistic young men setting out for adventure and advancement. By the time King Henry got word that Lambert's army had landed in the north of England, he set out to meet them. Lambert's army was promptly routed at the Battle of Stoke in 1487. Some people regard this battle as being a continuation of the Wars of the Roses, but Lambert's uprising was both feeble and short-lived. Henry took pity on the young man when he was brought to him after the battle was over. Lambert wasn't executed, as other kings may have been tempted to do, but instead was ordered to work in the royal kitchens. Lambert may well have been relieved for his reprieve, and he would work his way up the ladder, eventually becoming the king's chief falconer. Henry had shown leniency to a boy he must have known had been used as a pawn in other men's thirst for power, and so his treatment of Lambert is praiseworthy. Shortly after becoming king, Henry married Elizabeth of York, the daughter of Edward IV. Henry's claim to the crown had come from his Lancastrian descendants, and so, he hoped, this marriage would bring unity to England after 3 decades of the houses of York and Lancaster trying to tear each other limb from limb. Elizabeth was also the sister of the 2 princes in the Tower, who were almost certainly murdered by their uncle, Richard III, and so it's an interesting question to ponder how Elizabeth felt about marrying the man who vanquished her uncle Richard in battle. Either way, the marriage would prove to be successful, and she would provide Henry with heirs and spares. As it would turn out, it would be one of the spares who would succeed on Henry's death in 1509 and would go on to change history. When Elizabeth died in 1503 at the age of just 37, Henry was deeply upset, and it would have a profound effect on him. One of the most persistent problems that Henry had to deal with during his reign came in the shape of another young rebel by the name of Perkin Warbeck. Perkin alleged that he was the other prince in the Tower, Richard of York, who had, in fact, survived. Like Lambert had done, Perkin managed to persuade significant numbers of men in Ireland over the justness of his cause. Henry had to take this matter seriously, as Perkin was greeted at the court of the French king, Charles VIII. It's fair to say that Charles would have recognised that Perkin was an impostor, but having him around could give him a useful political tool over Henry. The Warbeck situation in the early to mid-1490s continued to grow at an alarming rate for Henry. It was clear in some quarters that people did believe that Perkin was, in fact, one of the supposedly murdered princes in the Tower. As a result, he became a significant figure in European politics, writing to Isabella of Castile, one of the most powerful women in all medieval history, and he was even introduced to the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian. Henry would ultimately survive the Warbeck uprisings, of which there were more than one, but not before Perkin had betrayed the leniency that Henry had also shown Lambert. Henry was left with little option but to hang Perkin in 1499 after he had rebelled one too many times. Henry has developed something of an image of being a grumpy and miserly old king. Indeed, it is tempting to fall into this line of thought, especially if you look at one of his portraits. But a serious and strong countenance was exactly what was needed for his reign, as he sought to put an end to decades of civil war. The Warbeck situation had also threatened to spiral out of control, with threats coming to Henry's kingdom from Scotland, Ireland, and the continent. But it must be remembered that he was a man who was not without emotion. His reactions to personal losses are testament to that. After the death of his heir, Prince Arthur, in 1502, he was distraught. A tale is told of how Elizabeth had come to comfort Henry after the news of the death of Arthur had been brought to them. When it was Elizabeth's time to be comforted, Henry went to her side and reminded her of the soothing words she had given him. Here we can see Henry is both a loving, caring, and attentive husband and father. Much of his reputation as a miserly old man, in fact, stems from the fact that Henry, after the death of Elizabeth the year after Arthur, gradually became more reclusive. The loss of his heir and queen in the space of a year had proved too much to bear for him. On his own death in 1509, Henry had left England in a financially healthy state, and he left the throne to be taken by his energetic 18-year-old second son, now Henry VIII. Perhaps the extraordinary nature of Henry VIII's reign also had a part to play in how his father was viewed by history. But make no mistake, Henry VII was a highly competent king, and if he had the opportunity to ask them, the people of Tudor England would happily have taken Henry's solid and competent rule over what his son would bring to the country over the next 38 years. Hello everybody, thank you for watching my video. Don't forget to share and subscribe.